Have you ever felt like you've found the perfect person just when you need them most? Did you need? That was what Samuel thought. After years of prayers, loneliness, and a past marked by failed relationships, met Luciana in the most unexpected place, but also the safest, a church. He was sitting in the third row, like every Sunday when they saw for the first time. He was wearing a simple white dress, but her bearing was almost angelic. She did not speak a lot, but when it made, his words were soft, almost melodic. It seemed so devoted, so connected with the divine, that Samuel felt as if a prayer ancient would have been finally answered. Luciana was not like the others women who had known. I was not looking for attention. I wasn't flirting. He didn't talk about trivialities with impudence. His topics were spiritual, their references were biblical, and their gaze, that gaze seemed to go through layers that neither I knew I had. God unites purposes, not people, he said in his third conversation. And you seem to have a purpose that someone wants to protect. Samuel, who always had been cautious, he felt something inside himself break. It was a mixture of peace, admiration, and a strange sense of urgency, as if that woman not only understood, but was connected to her destiny. The days became in weeks, and its relationship flourished like a gentle but steady fire. They prayed together, studied the scriptures, fasted in couple. It seemed the kind of relationship that every believer sounds to have, an emotional, physical, and spiritual connection, almost perfect, almost. From the beginning, there was details that Samuel preferred to ignore. Luciana never spoke about her past. When I was trying to go deeper, she diverted the topic with skill, even tenderly. He invited me to his apartment. They always saw each other in the church, in coffee shops, or in a little Samuel study. He attributed this to modesty, to spiritual reserves. She's different, he thought. She's not like the others. Luciana, too, had curious rules. Don't you like that they would touch him when he woke up, nor would they will ask where was going after, of the night worship. Samuel, in love, justified everything. Perhaps it was wounded before, maybe it is healing. And yet, something in the background was starting to bother him, little things, like the way he would sometimes stare at a lit candle for minutes at a time, blink, or the way his voice changed slightly when prayed out loud, as if something else was speaking through her. But he attributed it to his spiritual depth, the relationship. It moved quickly, too quickly. In less than 3 months, we're talking about getting married. Samuel, who always had been cautious, he felt that God was speeding up the times. And although his friends told him, they warned that he was going very fast, he responded firmly. When God speaks to you, you don't need tests, only obedience. They got married in a ceremony small, intimate, in his same temple where they met. The pastor prayed for them, blessed his union, but Samuel would never forget that moment when Luciana, repeating the vows, came down the look, just as he said, "Until the death do us part." For a moment, just a moment, his voice seemed to drop an octave, as if someone else had spoken through her. The wedding night was quiet, different. There was no overflowing passion nor emotion unbridled. It was more like a ritual, as if every step were preset. Luciana, always so controlled, it did not show nerves, nor laughter, nor surprise. Everything was calculated, and so began their life together. At first, everything seemed normal. Morning prayers, quiet dinners, long silences that Samuel found comfortable. But slowly, the atmosphere at home began to change. Lights, they blinked without reason. The clocks digital were restarting. There was a heaviness in the air, especially in the nights, and Luciana seemed more connected to something he couldn't see. Samuel hasn't done it yet. I knew, but in that wedding not only joined a woman, but sealed a spiritual pact with an entity that would not rest until it completely possessed him. Sometimes the answer to a prayer is not what God sends, but what his anxious heart decides to accept as divine. And in that moment, Samuel sealed your destiny with a kiss. that the first few weeks of marriage were calm, almost too calm. Luciana maintained his serene spiritual attitude, and Samuel, although I was beginning to feel a slight shadow of unease, I preferred focus in the blessings of the present. But the signs were there, only disguised as routine. Luciana had customs, unusual. Didn't like Samuel to enter the guest room. "It's where I pray," he said, with a smile that was not enough his eyes. The door always remained closed, and sometimes I noticed a dim light seeping through the crack, even at dawn. When he came closer, he could hear whispers, not in Spanish, not in no language that he could recognize. One night, while trying to open the door, the knob was freezing cold, and I swore something was breathing of the other side. "Were you praying?" he said, asked the day following. "Not everything is always prayer," he replied without looking. From that moment on, Samuel began to observe more closely. The details he had previously attributed to his deep spirituality no longer seemed to be hidden, so holy. During the prayers together, she spoke in languages, but they were not the charismatic languages that Samuel had heard in retreats nor congresses. They were guttural, with an unnatural cadence, sometimes as if many voices they would speak at the same time. The atmosphere of the house changed. During those moments, the air became thick, as if the oxygen was compressed. Sometimes objects vibrated subtly, and more than once, the dog neighbor threw himself against the door as if it wanted to attack something invisible. I ignored it, for love, for faith, for fear of accepting that something didn't fit. One day, upon returning of the work, he noticed a penetrating smell in the house, like herbs burned mixed with something sweet, rotten. Luciana was in the kitchen, with a pot containing a thick, black liquid. When he asked what was it, he replied with chilling calm, "To purify. There are things that need get out of you before you can be filled." That night, Samuel did not sleep. I was trying to convince yourself that it was just a oversensitivity, that Luciana came from a different spiritual tradition, perhaps more intense, more deep. But then they started the songs. Sometimes, in middle of the night, he woke up with a soft, barely audible hum, a humming sound monotonous that seemed to come of the hallway. When he got up, he found Luciana sitting in the sofa, rocking gently, with the eyes closed, or open, but without light. The humming had no melody recognizable. It was more like a lament, like a primitive invocation. "Are you okay?" Samuel asked, trying not to tremble. "I'm better than you," he replied. Without changing the rhythm of her body. But what began to torment him the most were the whispers. Sometimes, as he fell asleep, he would hear his name, not in his mind, in his heard, clear, precise, as if someone would lean right next to your bed and whisper tenderly, "Samuel, wake up." But when I opened the eyes, Luciana was sleeping, or pretending to be sleeping, always with that serene expression, too perfect. The doubt began to erode his peace. One Sunday after of the cult, Samuel tried to approach the shepherd. "How do we know when someone has a disturbing spirit?" he asked, disguising his anguish of theological curiosity. "Spiritual discernment is key," he replied the shepherd. "God does not hide what we need to see, but sometimes we love an idea so much that we don't want to look." That sentence struck Samuel like a revelation. Did he love Luciana? Or did he love the idea of having found the ideal woman? Had he ignored the warnings from his soul just to not break the image perfect? That night, he decided, do something I had avoided since the principle. Review your prayer room. He waited for Luciana to go for a walk, something she did every Tuesday evening. The door, it was closed, but not with key. Upon entering, he felt a shiver that ran through his spine. The fourth was dark, barely lit by candles placed in a spiral shape in the ground. In the center, a black clay figure with red eyes it watched. To his around, strange symbols, drawn circles with ash, and a notebook. It opened. The pages were written in a mixture of arcane symbols and prayers, in corrupted Latin, among them a drawing, a man chained, kneeling before a female figure with black wings and an inverted crown. And at the foot of the image, a phrase written in dark ink, "Once marked, your soul cannot be claimed." The sound of the door opening behind him, it froze. "You shouldn't have come in here," Luciana said. Her voice was deeper, more empty. Samuel closed a notebook. He said nothing. But something inside him, something that had lain dormant, awoke. For the first time, he felt fear. And the most disturbing thing was not what he saw in that fourth. It was to give realize that in his background, already it knew, it all began with a number. Samuel used to sleep soundly, but since that time evening in which he discovered the hidden altar in the Luciana's secret room, her dream became in a battlefield. He would wake up abruptly, with his heart beating with strength, soaked in sweat cold, feeling a heavy presence in the room, and it was always exactly at 3:03 in the morning. At first thought it was a coincidence. Maybe anxiety, maybe guilt for having invaded his wife's sacred space. But the repetition was too precise. They were not the 3 in period. It wasn't a range of minutes. It was always 3:03, and at that time, Luciana was never by his side. The bed. Samuel started looking for her around the house every time he woke up. Always found in the same place, sitting in the hallway, facing a wall, motionless, as if listening to something beyond from the physical world, with his back turned, whispering, "Luciana, are you okay?" he asked with a trembling voice. She didn't respond. Sometimes was spinning slightly the head and said, as if speaking with someone invisible, "He already comes." One night, Samuel decided in grave. He placed your cell phone discreetly on the nightstand, with the camera pointing toward the door of the bedroom. Up to date next, reviewed the recording. His blood froze. At 3:03 in point, the door of the room opened by itself. Luciana was standing there, watching him sleep for almost 2 minutes. He didn't blink. His face was expressionless, cold, without emotion. And then he leaned down slightly and whispered into the void, You are no longer yours." That night was his start of the descent. Dreams began to intensify. Samuel dreamed with dark, damp places, like endless caverns. I heard muffled screams, chains crawling, and deformed human figures muttering his name from impossible corners. But the most disturbing thing was that Luciana always was there, watching, smiling. In an especially vivid dream, he found himself in his own room, but the walls were covered with strange symbols. Luciana floated above the bed with the completely white eyes, and the hair extended as in water. He smiled, and in a voice that was not his own, he said, "You're not dreaming anymore, Samuel." He woke up screaming. His body, he was trembling. Luciana was lying next to him, watching him, fixedly. He didn't say anything. He just looked, as if already it knew everything. Waking up at 3:03 became routine, a cyclical torment. Samuel avoided sleep. He lived with fear of closing the eyes. He began to notice things out of place. Voices that they called from the cooking, laughter distant when turned off the lights, mirrors that reflected shadows that were not there over there. Desperate, he installed hidden cameras, one in the room, another in the hallway, and one more focusing directly on the altar that he still did not dare to destroy. The recordings do not give peace. Everything contrary. For 5 nights in a row, the cameras registered it same. Luciana was leaving the room exactly at 3:03. I was walking with slow, trance-like movements. His eyes had no pupils. They were completely black. He knelt in front of the altar, spoke in a guttural tongue that distorted the audio of the video. The image flickered as if an energy invisible were interfering. And in the end, Luciana looked directly to the camera, always, as if knew that he was being watched. Samuel felt that he was losing his control. He consulted a close friend, someone who worked in spiritual liberation. He showed him the videos. The friend turned pale. "Samuel, This isn't symbolic. It's not psychological. This is shared possession. What does that mean? When you get married with she, you entered into a pact. Your soul and hers are intertwined. She is not alone, and you are no longer completely you. That phrase remained recorded in his mind. Shared possession. He began to experience gaps in time. Entire hours disappeared from their memory. I found new objects in the house. Black candles, jars with herb remnants, small carved figures in bone. I didn't remember having brought them. One morning, he woke up with a metallic taste in the mouth. It rose, staggering, and saw that the walls of the aisle they had words written in an archaic language, with what appeared to be blood. Luciana was sleeping soundly, her face calm, but then occurred it unthinkable. She woke up, as always, at 3:03. This time, Luciana wasn't alone. In front of the altar there was a silhouette dark, not human, tall, stooped, with an elongated skull and blade, thin limbs. The figure turned slowly and looked. Samuel was left paralyzed. Luciana murmured without look at him. "Now it you have inside." He fainted. When they woke up they were 4:44, and Luciana wasn't there. For the first time, he thought that maybe there was exit. Something inside him no longer belonged. And every night, when he clock marked 3:03, the fear was gradually turning into something much more dangerous. Familiarity. Samuel was no longer the same. The days were confused with the nights, and his body, he walked by inertia, but his mind, his soul, were caught in an invisible vortex. That face that before filled with peace, now it was a mask whose smile you frozen the blood. Already it wasn't fear, it was certainty, a certainty I didn't want to name, because to do so meant accept that he had given his life, his spirit, to something that did not come from God. Was so when decided to seek help, not from conventional pastors, not from well-intentioned friends, but from a minister of spiritual deliverance. A man of which there was ear talk in a retreat years ago. I didn't have social media, no website, just a number written in a Bible, old, and a warning. If you seek it, be prepared to listen what you don't want here, it called. And the man accepted see it. They met in a humble house far from the city. The minister with a grey beard and piercing eyes. I'm listening in silence for over an hour. I don't interrupted. He did not show surprise. He just nodded. When Samuel finished, with the broken voice and the trembling hands, the man he finally spoke. "You're not crazy, son. You're not alone either. But you made a mistake that thousands comment all days. Which, you confused emotional comfort with divine confirmation. You prayed for love, but you didn't pray for discernment." That phrase, it crossed like a knife. He remembered his own words. When God speaks to you, you don't need tests. What irony. He had been so sure that he never asked himself whom was really listening. "She was sent," he continued, "the minister. It is no coincidence that the you met in the church. There are forces that know the language of the faith. They infiltrate, disguise themselves, and hunt, and want." The minister looked fixedly. "Souls, pacts, open doors, and you opened many." Samuel felt nauseous. The weight of his decisions fell upon him like a mountain, invisible. It wasn't just about his mental health or a failed marriage. It was a spiritual invasion, consented to by his own naivety, that I must do. Face her, not with shouting, not with violence, with light, with true, but be prepared. Because when the veil falls, the darkness, it doesn't hide, it attacks. That night, Samuel returned home determined. Luciana, I expected in the room. He was wearing a long black dress, and it looked like having been waiting for it for a long time, centuries. "Did you go get help?" he asked, without look at it. "Yeah. And what did they tell you?" "That you were sent." Luciana smiled, slowly, without emotion. "Always I knew this moment would come. Because She raised the view. His eyes were no longer his. They were deep, ancient, and empty. Because you were marked before you were born. You are a sought-after lineage. And no one cares for the lineage like us. Who are you? Those who balance, those who take what others waste. Souls without discernment are an offering open. Samuel stepped back a past. What are you? Luciana bowed the head. His voice changed, deep as if many voices they will speak in unison. I am not what you see. I am what you let in. In. At that moment, the candles in the house went out. The windows slammed shut. The air became heavy, unbreathable. But Samuel didn't move. He pulled out his Bible. He opened it tremblingly and began to read aloud. Even if I walk in valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Luciana screamed, not like a human being, an ancient, visceral shriek that shook the glasses. Your body shuddered, as if something was trying to get out from inside. He knelt down, the hands nailed to the floor. You don't know what you've done. Done. It belongs to us. No, Samuel cried. I was deceived, but I am no longer ignorant. I break this pact at once. In name of Jesus Christ. A bang shook the house. The altar was lit in flames, spontaneous. The clay figures burst, a wind-invisible neighborhood, the books, curtains, walls, and then Luciana fell, unconscious, silent. Samuel cried, not for her, for himself, same, for having been so blind, for having confused love with the submission, for having called divine what was only a disguise. But something inside him, I knew it wasn't over. To the few days, she disappeared. He left no note. He left no trace. Just one last sentence recorded in the mirror of the bathroom with something dark. This is not over. Samuel left the house. He burned everything she had touched. He underwent rituals of liberation, fasting, and prayers with spiritual leaders. But every time I closed the eyes, felt that it watched from somewhere corner that was no longer physical, because a truth had been revealed. There are pacts that are sealed with words, but the most dangerous ones are sealed with intimacy. Samuel thought it was all over when she left. He burned his belongings. He moved to another city. He attended deliverance sessions, surrounded by spiritual leaders who prayed with fervor. He even stopped using his full name for a time, as if changing it could erase the traces of what was experienced. But what had been sealed in the soul does not disappear with fire, neither distance. The first sign came 2 weeks after his moving. One morning, waking up sweating, he noticed a carved figure in the steam of the mirror of the bathroom, a silhouette female from behind, with a long hair, looking at her empty without face. He cleaned it trembling, but the evening following, then they started the words, anonymous messages, email no sender, papers slipped under the door, always with short but devastating phrases. You can't hide from what you carry inside. The bond was consummated. There is no turn back. Your prayers only arouse more interest. Samuel tried to ignore it. He thought maybe it was someone playing with him. His mind, some human evil without spiritual relationship. But then, in the middle of a prayer meeting, while everyone was singing, he heard her voice, Luciana's, clearly behind him. You're still mine. He turned around. There was nobody. The atmosphere began to change again. Little ones, power outages, feeling that someone it continued, dreams where she doesn't attacked, but rather hugged him, caressed him. He told him that I was surprised that the pact had been only the principle, and then understood. The war was not over yet. The physical had been broken, but the spiritual bond was still alive, because the true point of contact had not been legal marriage, nor not even the pagan altar. It had been the intimacy, the body, carnal union. There are doors that do not close with divorce, him said, O old man intercessor. They close with regret, but also with emotional resignation. While something in you wish she will find access. That phrase, it shuddered. And it was when noticed something deeper. A part of him, she was still attracted to Luciana, by her voice, by her eyes, by that intense connection they had shared. It had been fake, yes, but also had been real, at least in his perception. And that was enough to keep the open channel. Samuel entered in a period of fasting and silence. He isolated himself. He prayed for hours, sometimes without say words, only with the burning soul. It burned not only objects, but also memories, photos, messages, recordings, even destroyed the cameras with those that they had filmed. But the shadow returned. One night, while awake, he felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned slowly, and there was no one. But as he looked at the ground, he saw a mark of ash, the same symbol he had seen on his ancient home, the one she used in their rituals. She had been marked, and that mark wouldn't go away. With fear, only with power. Look for then to a shepherd who had worked in extreme cases, men and women who had been literally bound by forces imitating love. He confessed everything to her, every detail. The shepherd looked and said, "You're not being chased, you're being claimed. There's a contract, an act of surrender. It's not enough to fight. You must cut it off." How do you cut something like that? With authority, but not the yours, with the one that comes of the Spirit. For you wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against ancient covenants disguised in passion. And so began his true process. For weeks, Samuel went through profound ministrations, not just prayers, emotional exorcism, prayer in languages, resignations, word by word, complete confession, painful, every shared memory, every longing thought, toward she was confronted and loudly resigned. And it was there when something began to change. I was no longer dreaming with her as a lost wife. He saw her as she truly was, a channel, a facade, an entity that used love as a disguise. The battle was personal, but also spiritual. A month after the last session, while prayed in his room, felt a presence. This time it wasn't fear, it was clarity. It wasn't her, it was something else. A weight broke inside his chest, as if something had been ripped away, as if one last cord invisible would have been cut off. And then, peace. For the first time since her marriage, she slept a full night. She didn't wake up at 3:03. She didn't feel eyes looking at him. He didn't listen, voices. But the most revealing thing was that neither the strange, because there was understood a brutal truth. Not every intense connection is divine, and not everything that glitters with passion comes from light. When Samuel finally felt peace, it wasn't like what he had expected, had imagined. Didn't arrive with trumpets celestial, neither with a miracle visible. It was not a flash of light that covered instantly. It was a silence, a clean silence, a healthy emptiness. The voice that tormented in the early mornings disappeared. The shadows in the mirrors were no longer there, and most revealing, their own reflection, it seemed to him, again yours, for the first time in a lot time, was recognized. But the wound wasn't just spiritual, it was also emotional. For weeks, Samuel cried for himself, same, by the man who had been, by the one who allowed himself to be deceived, by the one who ignored the signs, the whispers, the alerts of your spirit. He understood that the healing did not come only from breaking the ribbon with her, but by forgiving herself for having allowed it. And also, I had to forgive her. No, because deserved compassion, not because his confession would have been honest, but because the hatred was another form of bondage. And while existed, his soul would continue being prisoner of the past. In deep prayer, alone under the rain, Samuel said aloud, I forgive you, not for you, for me, and for what God still wants. Do with me. It was as if the sky will breathe with he. Days later, in a church that there was welcomed during his process, shared his history for the first time. With a trembling voice, with sweaty hands, he told a small group as had fallen into a trap disguised as a blessing. When finished, there was silence. And then a woman raised the hand, then another, and another, and another man, all with similar stories, not identical, but marked by the same pattern, relationships that began with apparent spirituality, but that they hid chains dark, Samuel understood then that your history wasn't a punishment. It was a key. Every testimony he heard, every tear he witnessed, was a validation that what he'd experienced wasn't just for him. It was a warning, a mission, a calling. Believe a small online channel, a safe space. No sensationalism, no morbidity, just the truth. Published his history in video, in parts. Did not use names. He didn't blame anyone. He just spoke from the soul. The impact was immediate. Messages. They began to arrive from everywhere of the world. People who had never told what they experienced. Shepherds who didn't know how to treat these cases. Women and men who carried with invisible pacts without knowing how break them. Samuel responded to each message as if it were unique, because were. And each answer was another part of their own healing. He began to travel. He was invited to retreats, to conferences, not as an expert, but as a survivor. The message was not one of condemnation, but of discernment, not of fear, but of clarity. The devil not always comes with horns, he said. Sometimes comes with a Bible in the hand and a smile sweet. That's why discernment is not an option. It is a vital necessity. With time, Samuel rebuilt his life, slowly. He didn't seek other relationship immediately, not out of distrust, but out of reverence. He understood that true love, it does not rush. It reveals itself in truth, at peace, on purpose. And although spiritual warfare left scars, too you left weapons. Today, when see a couple to form, does not judge, but it does ask, have you prayed for discernment, or just for company? Because he learned that the emotional need can be a door open to the dark, if not filtered by the Spirit. And although sometimes, in dreams far away, a shadow tries to sneak in your subconscious, no longer fears you, because it is no longer bound, because now it is awake. And his story, which began as a love story, ended being a cry of alarm that saved many others. It wasn't destroyed, it was redirected. And your testimony, he became in torch. For a long time, Samuel believed that his elderly mistake, it had been falling in love too quickly, or ignoring the signs, or even not running away sooner. But with the years, with every testimony I heard, with every life touched by his history, understood a truth even deeper. His error was not fall in his deception. It was not having sought discernment when most of all needed. Love, when it is not filtered by the Spirit, can be so dangerous as the hate, because the desire for company can cloud the sharper senses. Because the heart, when it is alone, sometimes listen any voice that promises shelter, even if that voice doesn't come from God, and evil rarely presents itself as such, doesn't arrive with claws nor red eyes, arrive with words sweets, with prayer in the lips, with an imitated faith, because the hell is not afraid to disguise itself as heaven when the soul is desperate to find one. Samuel understood that the discernment is not a special gift reserved for prophets or leaders. It's armor, a survival tool, a flashlight in the darkness of the soul, because not everything that seems good is good, and not all peace immediate is a sign of divine approval. In his lectures, he usually says something he learned the hard way. The devil doesn't want to destroy you right away. He wants to make you fall in love first, because a seduced soul is easier to catch than a frightened soul, and that is where many fall, in the emotional, in what it feels like in what seems aligned but is not, has been tested in prayer, because praying for love without praying for discernment is like inviting someone into your home without asking him to take off his mask. Samuel stopped looking for explanations. He didn't need to understand all the details, Dark. I didn't need to know how many entities were involved, nor that name had the pact. All I needed to know was that it had been broken, and with that knowledge, walked every day with a new one, clarity. I knew that in this life, the spiritual is more real than the visible, that pacts are not always sealed with ink, that a bed can be an altar, and that an I love you without a divine purpose can be a sentence, but also learned something else. That no one is out within the scope of the redemption. That even those who were touched by the darkness, they can see the light again. Because your story did not end in defeat. It ended in revelation, and so it converted into something more than a victim, converted in witness, a witness of the invisible, of what moves behind the faces kind and the words correct. How the human soul, when not alert, becomes in disputed territory, and today, from his health, since its freedom, issues a final warning. Don't ignore the signs, don't minimize what you don't understand, and never confuse emotional intensity with spiritual purpose, because true love doesn't make you doubt who you are. It doesn't empty you. It doesn't drag you down the confusion. True love builds, it illuminates, it liberates. Everything other than that, it's a disguise. And if you ever feel wrapped in a relationship that steals from you peace, which isolates you, which darkens your faith, don't have fear of doing the question that Samuel never asked in time. Was it sent or just allowed? Because sometimes the difference between the blessing and the destruction, it is simply having asked God before saying yes.